for October 20th. We're going to be talking about Puppet Factor hiera pull requests. There's not a whole lot this week, as a lot of the things are still blocked from waiting on contributors to reply to certain comments. The two that we have for Puppet specifically are Pup 5395, which is formerly the hiera 118 ticket that Rob submitted or has a PR for, and then there's a OSX change that we can talk about. So I guess the first one is for hiera, or sorry, for this one. Rob, do you want to just summarize kind of what this PR does and why it's important?
Yeah, this allows us to do automatic parameter lookups with deep merge, and it does that by adding hiera advanced parameter bindings, which will go in puppet.conf, so it's set to default to false, and a lookup options : and then your key name for your control. And you'll find a series of commits. I can certainly rebase it once everything's done, but I've got the changes for all those for all the lib files to do that. The tests, I had to do a fix-up of an existing test, which I saw was failing. Henrik said that should have been passing, but just without making other changes to those tests or to the things they were calling, it was failing for me. And there's a related change in the 5395 for documentation in a different PR. Okay. But obviously that would be pending this going through.
So I don't know that much about hiera. When you're talking about deep merging, can you describe like a scenario where that's important?
Yeah, I'm using it with MySQL Server. We have override options, and we have some common override options, but then some node-specific overrides. And because you can't do deep merge with automatic parameter lookups, you have to do some fun hiera calls to get that to work, as opposed to just setting the more specific settings you want in a hash.
Okay, makes sense. So the one thing I was surprised about was that there weren't unit tests for this libpuppet resource type, and I know that unfortunately a lot of the methods in this file are private, and I thought Henrik had some thoughts about how we should be handling that.
Yeah, so if you take a look, there are some spec tests that I wrote in the last two commits. Okay. And by the way, I pasted in there what the workaround kind of looks like for doing the override options and why this would make it a lot easier.
In the commentary?
Yeah, in the group chat.
Oh, cool.
So you basically have to use class instantiation instead of include to do it, or hack up the module, which is obviously not an alternative here.
Cool.
So going back to the spec test, which two files are they? Yeah, so spec integration data binding is where things happen.
Okay.
Actually, that first line, I don't know that I need that anymore. But what this does is this indirectly calls it by doing the lookups in a data binding. So you don't actually call the private, but it has the same effect. There was an existing test that would look for this testing binding class. But then if you look down around lines, let's see, where would it be? 57 and on. what I was having a problem with.
And should I look at the whole file or look at the diff?
We can look at the whole file, whichever. I didn't look at each specific commit. So, oh, I'm sorry. The diff for the PR I was looking at, not the diff for each commit. Whichever one works, I can.
So here's the diff of the commit or the PR.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So in that file, if you go down to line 57.
Okay.
So this is the issue I had initially was you can see it was doing a catalog compile to catalog testing binding. But up above in line 52, it describes testing data. So I don't know how that would have been passing before, but Henrik said it should have been.
That's concerning. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, it looked like these tests kind of were missing some love. So I got them working without testing the new functionality, and then added in the new functionality. So if you look at those two commits, the first commit against tests is just to get it passing as is, and then the second one was to add the new functionality, which I did by changing some of the functions that were used and then truing up the original test to use the renamed functions.
Okay, so this is the one to get the test working?
If that's the first commit, yeah.
Yeah, this is the one, the first one from, looks like yesterday, where it changes from binding to data.
Yeah. Yeah, instead of having the data inline, I put it up at the top and then called it down below, and then in the second change I made it so we had multiple tiers that could be bound that way.
Okay, and this is related to the default, I assume the default change in hiera, where we now take into account the client cert as part of the default hierarchy.
Let's see. Okay, well, I guess I lied a little bit. I did true up the stuff, the tests so they worked, but I guess I didn't keep my commits clean. That line there actually isn't required. That was part of the second part, but I guess I had put it in earlier.
All right.
So in any case, between those two, the old test pass, the new test pass, but that client cert level, I couldn't get it to dynamically parse that, and I don't know if that's one of those circular dependencies where it doesn't see the fact to pull it or not. You see there, I had to just hard set it to client one, which was the name of the second YAML file I created. So I don't know if there's a better way to do that, but that was the extent of how far I could get on my own with the testing.
Okay. Did the new tests that you add, did you ever verify that they fail when you didn't have your code change in place?
No.
Okay.
No, I did not.
I
did verify they failed when I put bad data in there, but no, I didn't. I didn't go back and make sure that I didn't design them before the code.
Okay.
I can go do a quick check on that.
Cool. This kind of thing makes me nervous because it seems like if it was passing before with something that was clearly wrong, it sounds like the test may not actually be testing anything. But maybe your changes brought that to the surface.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how it would have been able to include testing binding when testing data was up above.
Yeah. Yeah. That just makes me wonder if this thing is, like for whatever reason, resource variable is always equal to the value no matter what you do up above here, just because of the way the test is structured. Just sometimes we run into fragile tests that pass no matter what you do, so there's no,
I can say that I did do a checkout of upstream origin and ran the test, and I still got failures. So that would have been the existing test without my changes, or without our changes. I see Felix joined.
Hey, Felix. So you're saying if you just check out the normal, what's currently, this is master, right? And you just run, are you running that test in isolation and it fails?
I run it in isolation and it fails. I didn't run the full suite of tests. I've not had good luck because I'm on EL6 with RVM 193.
Okay.
Oh, it's working. Hi.
Hey. Yeah. So this kind of thing is usually, there's some spec order dependence where this test only passes when some other test runs first and does some, like sets some global state, creates a file, that makes some change that enables this test to pass. And yeah, so I'll create a ticket to track that down, but that's kind of unrelated to your change. This just happens every once in a while, and we have to go figure out why that is.
Yeah, I don't know if it's possible for you on something newer than 193 to run the full suite and see if that fails as is when you have a chance, and let me know.
Yeah, so like a lot of times what you can do is just run, well,
like run the directory instead of the whole thing.
Yeah, that'll take a while on your notebook, but can be enlightening.
Do you guys know about parallel spec? So there's a way, there's a rake target that will allow you to run specs in parallel, and should only take about somewhere between a minute and 2 minutes to run all the specs, which is it's what we use internally in our CI systems and developing locally. So anyways, I'll file a ticket about finding this order-dependent test failure. And yeah. I mean, other than that, I don't really have any questions on this. Need to look at it a little closer and understand more of the details. Michael, did you have any comments on this?
No, nothing further.
Okay.
I'm doing a baseline spec run just to make sure that everything's good before I try out the new tests.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So I'll comment on this.
For what it's worth, it does seem sensible to me to use a hierarchy that doesn't rely on fact values here, because, yeah, in specs you don't necessarily can rely on fact values.
You're talking about using client cert versus the hard-coded certificate name?
Yes, exactly.
Actually, I guess I'm not quite sure what's happening with merge strategy. Oh, I see. You use that again later, and it's nil otherwise.
Yeah, and if you look
Okay.
in type
Got it.
RB, it spells out the valid forms.
Okay, so there's extra code just to figure out what a merge strategy should be. And if you use one, you specify it when you're doing data binding lookup. Okay. And then I guess this didn't require any changes in hiera, or did they already get put in?
No, it doesn't actually change anything in hiera because like the data binding indirection doesn't actually use hiera apparently.
Oh. Okay. So,
No, that's not how that went.
I think it's calling up through like the Puppet hiera class, but not actually. It's not like it actually calls out to hiera itself.
Yeah, it would need to, but I think we didn't need to change hiera because support for the deep merge, etc., is already there in in the API. And what happens here is that that API gets used in case of special keys. Does that make sense?
generally, yeah.
So at some point, currently the lookups will map to some hiera call internally, but up to now those were pretty much hard coded to do the priority search. And now this thing here adds the ability to pass that extra parameter to choose another lookup strategy instead.
And to just kind of walk through this, the resource type here, this is the old version of the code, calls Puppet data binding indirection .find. And that essentially, in the data binding class in Puppet data binding, this indirects method here, metaprograms an indirection class method on this data binding so that you can call data binding .indirection, and then that indirection has a terminus, like an implementation, a backend implementation, and the actual implementation depends on this terminus setting, which in Puppet data binding terminus defaults to hiera. So then you can find the actual implementation by looking at libpuppet indirector data binding, and then these are the backend implementations, and so hiera is one, and that's the default one. And if you look at that guy, it extends this generic puppet indirector hiera, and this is what actually does the merging behavior and eventually calls into hiera. So I think all the merging behavior is what we're saying is like it's all done here and kind of resolved before we call into the hiera.
Right.
The issue as it was described in the ticket wasn't that hiera couldn't do it, it was that you couldn't specify the merge strategy previously.
Yep.
For the APL lookups.
And I think the tests look good. They're definitely they're definitely failing before you get the change in to add this option. It just doesn't merge it the right way.
Cool.
So you're saying you saw failures yourself?
Yeah.
On the master? Okay.
Yeah. I'm thumbs up on this change. I think it looks
That makes me feel better.
good.
Spent a few hours on that last night going, this should be passing, I'm pretty sure, but okay.
Yeah. And also, that's awesome. The thing I was talking about that we use internally is parallel spec, which will run, it'll group up all the specs and run them in separate workers processes, and then it should run quite a bit faster than the normal way. I won't make you suffer through watching that, but we use internally.
Cannot someone like translate out all the tests to C++? I think that will work really well.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. All right. So as far as kind of next steps for this, generally the hiera tickets fall into the language team bucket, and so we'll put that into their backlog that they then pull into a sprint, and they do the final review and merge, and then make sure it goes through CI and patch up any issues that might come up as a result.
okay.
So I'll make sure to get that ticket routed to the right place.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. We really appreciate it.
Update that.
Do you want me to rebase that into lesser commits, or is that fine the way it is?
I don't know. I'm fine either way. The one thing is, it's nice if the tests pass at each commit, so that if you're doing a bisect, it doesn't get confused. You know what I mean? Like for example, if you implement the code changes first, and then the test will fail, and then you in another commit add the tests that make it pass, it's better to merge those together so that it's a clean, clean history that way. But keeping things, I also don't want to just mush everything together into one commit.
Yeah.
There's lots.
I mean, CI passed on the last 3 commits, so the only question is whether the first 2 have issues, and I kind of doubt it.
The first 2 originally said HI 118 instead of PUP 5395, and that's why they were failing on the rate commit test.
Right. No, I think those will all pass CI at this point, or pass specs.
Cool.
I think so too. Also, yeah, I kind of like how things are subdivided. I'd really keep it that way.
All right, cool. If we don't think that the client cert is right to the dynamic client cert, there's like one line I need to change, and I'll get that done in the next few minutes, and then that would be the last change required. Because I think up at the top of the list I added something to set the client cert, which doesn't really matter if we're not doing it dynamically. Yeah.
I'm fine with having it be explicit and not be subject to any local, local configuration.
Okay. All right, I'll take those client cert or cert, the cert name settings out and push that up, and that should be the last one then.
Oh, sorry, are you going to take the client cert out? All right.
There's no need to set the client cert since we're actually doing a scope that will pull from that file automatically.
Oh, sorry. So you're saying because you set it here, we don't need to override the Puppet setting.
Right.
Okay, wait. So there's two keys here.
But don't you need the agent in quotes run to advertise itself as that client?
If the hierarchy was looking at client cert and trying to dynamically interpret it, yes. But since it's not, it's always going to hit client 1, which is why I have the configure hiera for 1 tier and for 2 tier as separate. It's kind of ugly. I don't like it, but unless there's a way to actually dynamically pull the client cert, I don't see that there's a good way to merge those two into a single function again.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I would assume that there's currently some initialization missing from the compiler object that is being used, and no idea how much work it will be to make that compiler actually do the right thing with the client cert setting. Yeah, right. Because it's not even that simple. Because yeah, Josh, as you just said, actually, you would need kind of an agent to make a request that that confers that client cert value, etc., etc. So I don't think that really makes sense to use the setting here. In other words, it wouldn't make sense for the compiler to ever look at the cert name setting and using its value for compiling purposes.
Yeah, I would expect the terminus in here, basically, the find method is what eventually gets called. And that find method, the request that gets passed in is going to have some information. Specifically, request.key is the thing that will eventually be the cert name that we're looking up the hiera data for. And
no, I don't think so.
well,
I think the request key in this case is just the hierarchy, so the key for whatever value you want to retrieve from hiera. But yes, for hiera to what's hiera? Where's this hiera object initialized?
It's down below. It's a hiera instance, hiera.new.
Right. From hiera config, and I think when you call hiera.new, then oh no, that's right. So the expansions of variables that are being used in the hierarchy is done on every lookup. That means that this information is pulled from the scope, from whatever is the compiler scope, and that would be part of the information in the request object, yes. Although not in the request key, I'd assume. But yeah, the indirect request environment variables. Oh,
How does this agent name get passed through here? Is that in the scope?
excuse me.
So name is going to be
Name is from QName up in 566.
right. It's the thing that the variable you're trying to look up in hiera.
Yeah.
How does hiera know what your client, like which agent this request is being made?
Do you see the third parameter in the call you just?
The options?
Yeah.
Or variable
So
scope?
the scope is being passed.
Yeah.
And like the compiler puts lots of information in the scope, such as all the fact values and also the client cert value that should be available from the scope, and I just assume that Hiera uses that to look up these values from the hierarchy.
Yeah, maybe the other tricky part is I was looking at the client cert, which comes from cert name, so maybe it's not doing the translation by the time this gets instantiated through the mockup.
Yeah, and it cannot. I mean, the compiler usually operates on a catalog request that holds some information, like the request is done with a certain certificate, and the common name of that certificate can be extracted and can be added to the scope as the cert name value. But if you just create a compiler from a spec and run that, then there is no request and there is no certificate that was used. So, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
sure.
I don't know if there would be another global or not variable, but global setting like FQDN or something that would be more useful, but that's why I just kind of avoided it.
I think you'd really have to create a compiler object and then mock that in a way that it assumes that it has been requested using a proper certificate. But again, that seems way too much work here just to enable you to use a hierarchy that is somewhat more lifelike. I mean,
okay, so I guess what I can probably do then is leave it at client 1, take out the settings of the cert name, and then maybe add a comment in there describing that it's being used to mock up an artificial version of a dynamic lookup.
yeah, I mean, the test doesn't care how the hierarchy is structured. Yeah. For all it's worth, you could just use layer 1, layer 2.
Yeah, I just want the next person after me to understand why I did it. So I'll just take out lines like 128 and then add in a little comment down below.
I mean, you could, if you're after posterity, which I absolutely endorse, then you would probably use something like agent.example.net.
Okay.
So that immediately looks like an FQDN, and that makes the intent just a little more clearer.
In the hierarchy here?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's easy enough to do.
Okay. All right, so let's see. Also, I forgot to review. So I think we're good on that ticket, right? And I forgot to review actions from last week. So there's a ticket about the static compiler that I still need to look at. Just haven't had time. That is pup 5035. And there's another ticket about adding timing metrics to the report. And it basically gives us more fine-grained resolution into what the agent is doing. And we've added that to basically our client triage bucket that we review and pull into next sprints. But we haven't had time to look at that yet.
All right, so I'll need to run along. Great talking to y'all.
Hey, you too, Felix.
Bye.
So one other ticket I wanted to mention is there's a CF property list implementation that reads p-lists in binary rather than relying on XML, which is a huge performance improvement. Unfortunately, the ticket needs some work, and I've added it to our next sprint. And hopefully we can get that resolved, but it's going to be a bit of work to do that. We also, since last time, we merged 2 PRs. One was the escaping single quotes in titles when doing Puppet resource. And then the other one was sorting OSX group membership. Previously, if you specified the desired value in a different order, Puppet would think the resource was out of sync and would rerun every time. And then all of the other tickets are still waiting for updates. There's a zpool ticket. Basically, we want to split out the various properties and parameters into separate values on the type so that we can validate those. Yeah, and all these are the same from last time. And no change on that. Except for this one. I mentioned this one. So this is, there's a PR up. There's no Puppet ticket yet. It's PR 4337, and this is basically adding the ability to add auto relationships from a resource to a defined type. And let me bring that one up. And actually, oh, there is a ticket. Okay. So the author describes wanting to have a custom type that has an auto require on IP set, where IP set is a defined type. And there's a couple of things, couple of concerns with this. The implementation, well, actually, before I talk about implementation, this change means that if we were to make this change, then I believe it would not affect existing users. I think that you would have to opt into this behavior in the sense that your custom type would have to explicitly you know, in its auto require, auto before, etc. methods, it would have to express a dependency on a defined type, which, since that has never worked before, I don't think anyone would do that. So that, I think, is safe to add in a in a feature release and not break existing users. There's some. Does that make sense, Michael?
Oh, we're looking at this one.
Yeah.
I was busy chatting in Puppet Dev about it. Can you summarize what you were just saying again?
Sorry, I'm just saying that I think that this is a change, that it's opt-in behavior and that we won't break existing users.
Right. That's what it seemed like when we were talking about it yesterday.
And then there's some question about how we can make this more explicit so that we know basically how do you clearly identify what is a defined type and what isn't in a way that doesn't rely on heuristics about kind of looks like one.
Yeah, this seems like something we should probably, at the very least, pull into an interface on the resources.
Right.
Like, is this a defined type?
Which I actually saw. This guy knows that a definition thing, it even has.
Oh yeah.
These are different resource kinds, and resource kinds has we metaprogram predicate methods for all those things. So you can say definition ?
You were playing with that yesterday. Did you find a way to find what the actual query needs to be?
No, I couldn't get from so in the auto require you have instances of Puppet types, and I couldn't get from that object Oh no, no, I forget. But I basically couldn't get from the thing that I had to the underlying resource type.
Ah,
I'm sure there's a way. I just
yeah. Okay, so those are both things I think we should point out on the ticket.
yeah. That would clean up this logic quite a bit. The other thing is that let's see. Henrik had some question marks, and I haven't fully thought about the implication of this, but so one is that auto require could create a circular dependency.
Since you're auto-requiring a defined type, I guess, yeah, you could have an explicit requirement in the use of the defined type. There's not a way to create another or to declare that a defined type auto-requires something else.
Right, but it could just flat out require.
Yeah. How is this handled by types that auto-require types?
That's a good
Custom
question.
types.
That is a good question. It looks like if there's already an edge, it skips it. So maybe we should check that.
Yeah.
The other question I have is, what's the implication going to be if now suddenly we have relationships to define types that previously we didn't? Or is it currently possible to have a relationship to a defined type, and this is just making it easier to do that? Because does that make sense?
Whether there could have been hacks that people did before that do the same thing?
Yeah, like if this now makes it possible to do something that has never been possible before, then now suddenly we have edges to define types, which may break code that assumes that would never happen. But if, on the other hand, it's always been possible to have an edge to a defined type, it's just that this is making that easier, then that seems less concerning. Because the code that is walking the graph or whatever is going to say it would have had to handle the case where the edge might point to a defined type previously.
Yeah.
And this wouldn't change that. But if it does change it, now we have to think about any code that now needs to take into account, oh, this edge could point to a defined type, whereas previously that could never happen. And I'm just not clear on which of the two cases it is. Because this kind of thing where it's, like basically, so the code that walks the graph, right, in order has to take into account all the edges. If previously it never had an edge to a defined type, then it seems like this kind of logic would have to be replicated in those places as well to know, oh, you know what, this is the defined type, I should skip that. Which that seems like that could be a major problem. I don't think that's the case, but it would be good to confirm that, because the alternative is that we do have currently, like Puppet does support having edges to define types. And if that's the case, when we're walking the graph, for example, we already have to take that into account.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't know a good way how to confirm it. It's a lot of. I mean, I'd probably run this through acceptance tests before merging it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm considering how it might interact with the PR or the fixes Brandon did for fixing up implicit dependencies, or what was it? Shoot, I forget
Generated.
exactly what that took. Generated resources. Whether that would have any interaction with this.
Yep. Hopefully not, because we're just adding new things that can be auto-required. But yeah, that's a good question.
Where was it that the defined type stuff appeared? Oh, in type.rb.
Yeah, it's in lib puppet resource type.rb.
Resource.
And then from resource has a reference to its resource type. Here.
Okay.
And for example, we're using that to determine what's a capability resource and what's not. So there's the methods are there. We just have to connect the dots.
Yeah. I mean, you're still checking whether the name that's given for the type matches a resource, and that resource internal name for the resource might not be exactly what it is, or match exactly.
Say that again?
Well, I'm just thinking, even if we know that the resource that we're looking at is a defined type, we then are trying to match a name for an auto-require type to the name of the defined type. And the capitalization is presumably happening because internally they're not stored the same way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If we know it's a defined type, we could probably do a case-insensitive comparison, but I'm not confident of that either.
Yeah, it seems like ideally you'd have type information being returned with this list of auto-required things, so that there was no possibility of name collision. But maybe the internals are already type and title have to be unique already, and so we don't run into that situation in practice. Yeah. All right. Okay, so I have some questions that I'll add to the PR.
Okay.
One is, will we skip edges in this circular dependency case? Can edges currently refer to defined types, or is this new behavior?
Mm-hmm.
How does this interact with Brandon's change, and how do we differentiate between auto-require matching defined type versus a resource that have the same name?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it, unless anybody has any other things.
I have nothing else.
Cool. And Rob, do you have anything else? No. All right. So that's the end of the community PR triage. Thanks for coming.